I've been asked more than once where I get my morals from, as an atheist. I've even had people insult me by insinuating that I have no morals because I don't believe in the divine. I always find this puzzling. In fact, I find much of the religious trappings that are foisted upon morality to be both bizarre and unnecessary. I'd like to discuss my view on the topic. But first, some caveats. In this video, I will be touching on evolution. I have no interest in debating evolution with creationists, so I'd appreciate it if those who refuse to accept the evidence for evolution wouldn't pester me with their commentary. I'll also point out that the subjects which I am discussing, morality, evolution, biology, human behavior, social dynamics, are not subjects I'm an expert in. So take what I say as a matter of personal opinion and definitely do your own research. While I may not be an expert, I do think of myself as a very thoughtful person who has spent a good deal of time thinking on these matters, viewing media and reading material about them as life permits. So with that said, let's get to it. I've found that religious people often claim that there are or must be moral absolutes, and that these moral absolutes have to come from God. Without a divine authority upon which to base morals, morals have no basis. I'll be asked, for example, is it wrong to murder? And of course I say, yes. And then I'll be asked, what makes it wrong to murder? And at this point, it doesn't really matter what reasons I give. Unless I'm prepared to invoke a divine mandate, the same question will keep coming. And what makes that wrong? I find this to be both tiresome and silly. Why? Well, that brings me to evolution. In a nutshell, evolution by natural selection favors those organisms that are best adapted and most likely to reproduce, and thus pass on their genetic material to future generations. Mutation creates change, and natural selection weeds out harmful or less adaptive changes. Given enough time, evolution can produce creatures which are not only remarkably well adapted to their environment, but incredibly diverse. But, and this is important, evolution doesn't just give rise to appearance. It gives rise to behavior. To illustrate this, let's talk about birds for a minute. In many varieties of birds, one sex is selected by the other for mating, based on physical appearance, the plumage. Hence you have peacocks with incredible tails, or birds of paradise with exquisite or even outlandish feathers. Why? Because an organism isn't just competing with other species, it's competing with its own species as well. You might be a particularly hardy peacock that knows where to get the good food, but if your tail is shabby, your hardiness and ingenuity are for naught. If the peahens aren't interested in you, then your genes aren't going to get passed on to another generation. And just as evolution modifies basic physical attributes, evolution also modifies the basic wiring of brains. Consider for a moment the fascinating family of birds called bowerbirds. In these birds, there are also traits that females use to select males to mate with. But in some bowerbird species, most notably the Vogelkop Bowerbird, it isn't the physical appearance of the male that the females are most interested in. To impress females, the males engage in construction projects. They build bowers. These bowers can be large, exquisite, ornate, and colorful. Males will travel far and wide collecting objects of particular colors and then return to the bower, carefully arranging these objects in order to create something that will be pleasing to the female. The bower itself is not a nest. The female will build her own nest and raise the young herself. It is created solely to entice the female to mate with the male. When a female arrives to inspect the bower, the male will hide within it and sing. If the female is impressed with the display, she will enter the bower and mate with the male. I guess you could call it an elaborate bachelor pad. Interestingly, the young bowerbirds are raised by the female, and the female doesn't build bowers. The behavior is not learned. Surely the male doesn't truly understand why he is building and decorating his bower. He just feels a strong desire to do so. The thing to note is that the act of creating the bower is essentially a behavioral externalization of the peacock's tail. Instead of wearing bright colors, the male bowerbird has a built-in instinctive behavior. He has it because having it increased the likelihood of his ancestors reproducing. It's an incredible adaptation, and you should look into it if you want to learn more about these interesting birds. Check the description for links. I can't say for certain, of course, but it seems like a safe bet that if we could wind back the clock, originally this arose from basic nesting behavior. Males of many species of birds prepare nests, possibly multiple nests, and then try to attract females, which select nests based on whatever criteria are important to them. Then one bird is born with an odd mutation that makes him do something a little different with his nests. He builds them in some way that is pleasing to females, but not strictly utilitarian. Doesn't matter as long as it gets him a mate, which causes his odd mannerism to get passed on genetically to his offspring. Clearly, animals have instincts, and those instincts are acquired through evolutionary processes. Which brings me to humans. As animals, we also have instincts. For example, like most other animals, we have instincts to survive, to nourish ourselves, to seek mates, and to protect our young, and so forth. But interestingly, most of our instincts don't seem to elicit the same religious need to base them on some sort of divine mandate. You must eat regularly to survive. But what makes you eat? You feel a powerful drive, which we call hunger, and the only way to satisfy it is to eat. Nobody argues that you feel hunger because God wants you to eat. Why do you have this behavior? Because any primitive human born with a mutation that prevented him from feeling hunger would starve to death long before he would reproduce and pass that mutation on. Different species have different survival behaviors. One thing particular to primates is that we tend to be highly social creatures. Unlike spiders or beetles, primates form elaborate, cohesive social structures. Many species have bonds between mates or between parents and children, but primates actually form societies. Apes have friends. Maintaining a social structure is challenging because there is still competition within a social structure. And of course, being part of a social structure carries burdens as well. You're expected to chip in, to help out in ways that don't immediately benefit you directly. So why are species social at all? Because it enhances survival. Without a social structure, you can survive only on your own attributes, your particular set of genes. But in a society, you benefit from the genetic makeup of everyone in your social group. Mark is the best at making spears. Jane is the best at throwing spears. Cleo is the best at finding animals, and so forth. For Jane to possess Mark and Cleo's attributes, she would need their genetic matter. But if she forms a social group with them, each benefits from the attributes of the other. If Jane becomes ill, instead of just leaving her to die in the wild alone, the tribe will protect her because she is a benefit to the group. Because social behavior is such a boon to survival, the more a primate is able to form strong social bonds, the more likely they are to survive and reproduce. Which means we have social instincts. We have a built-in urge to be in good standing with our tribe. Is it any wonder at all that behaviors we consider bad are precisely those which would endanger our standing with the group if we engaged in them? And all the behaviors we consider good are precisely those which enhance our standing with the group. You have a built-in urge to do good for the same reasons that you have a built-in urge to eat. It's a survival instinct. This is why asking what makes X wrong is such a silly question. Would it traditionally endanger your relationship to a social group? Yes, that's what makes it feel wrong to you. From this basic instinct, we construct our moral concepts around the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. As a rule, we generally don't murder, rape, and so forth within our tribe, precisely because we don't want that done to ourselves. The golden rule is instinctual among social animals, and the more social they are, the stronger the instinct. Yes, of course, we still have murderers and rapists among us, but they are the exceptions, not the rule. If you like, you can think of them as mutations. That social instinct just wasn't strong enough for them. Asking how someone could be a murderer, if morality is the product of evolution, is like asking how someone could be born blind, if sight is the product of evolution. Understanding this renders statements like, "How can you have morals without God?" as illogical. Morals aren't magic. They're a product of biological evolution. Furthermore, it also explains why statements like, "If there was no God, we'd all just be raping and killing each other," are utter nonsense. If everyone behaved that way, we'd have no social structures, and never would have gained the survival advantages from belonging to social groups. Among a social species, natural selection would select against such behavior. Understanding that we are evolved as a social species explains not just morality, but also selflessness, empathy, compassion, and even love. Many attributes that religious thinking tries to make magic of. All of these behaviors are a benefit to a social species, and having them increases the chance of survival and reproduction. Sometimes people have trouble with that. They say, if a guy sacrifices himself for love, or out of altruism, how can that improve his chances of passing on his genes? Well, of course, the person who sacrifices himself can't then pass on his specific set of genes. But the thing to remember is, what you think of as your genes, they aren't really yours. Half came from mom, half from dad, right? So your siblings carry some of your genetic matter. Your cousins carry some, and so forth. Even if your particular mix of genes is killed off in a selfless act, if that act increases the survival chances of others who possess portions of your genetic matter, that genetic matter survives to the next generation. From an evolutionary perspective, this makes a lot of sense among family groups or small, close-knit tribes. But our big brains, coupled with our strong social instincts, has in modern times allowed us to create larger and larger social groups. Now we have a loose-knit society that spans the globe, and closer-knit societies that span thousands of miles. As a small group of primates wandering the savannah, we would very likely not care or even know if another group of primates 1,000 miles away was under attack. But in modern societies, if you're a New Englander living in the 1940s, you are very upset about the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, 5,800 miles away. Morality, compassion, and selflessness are things that we carry from our humble origins in very small groups, which is why when we form social groups today, even if they are genetically diverse, we still have that urge to help our group, even at our own cost. To me, that brings a lot of sense to morality. A good framework that doesn't employ unsupported or fantastic claims to rationalize morals, and therefore I personally find it much more satisfying. Thanks for watching. Let me know what you think.